Good afternoon. My name is Mishori. I'm a faculty at the Department of Environmental Studies, School of the Environment and Earth Sciences in Tel Aviv University. I do environmental ethics and lots of bioethics lately, which I combine with social and environmental activism. I'll explain a little later. This is a quote from internet news appearing a few days ago that Israel invited doctors from abroad for a free medical cannabis course. The medical cannabis unit in the Ministry of Health offers 20 places in the cannabis physician qualification course that will take a few months for physicians from 8 countries abroad. For 5 days, doctors from abroad will study the therapeutic method from the controversial Green Book. The Green Book is the Ministries of Health guidebook, which is also the 106 procedure for medical cannabis therapeutic methods. I will criticize this guide later. This is a response by cannabis activist and medical cannabis patient. Doctors will learn in this course how to interrupt the continuation of the therapeutic treatment, longitudinal care of thousands of patients, how to prioritize other considerations over the good of the patients, and how to divide cannabis into strains according to THC and CBD only, ignoring the other hundreds of cannabinoids. In short, a bad joke that soon, when the whole world will laugh at the Green Book's nonsense, will damage Israel's image as a progressive country. Upon completion of the expanded course in Israel, doctors will continue to North Korea, where they will learn about the Geneva Convention, civil rights, and how to respect views which differ from those of the establishment, according to the Red Book principles. This kind of irony, in my opinion, is perfectly justified. So this lecture is a critique of the policy of the Israeli government and the Ministry of Health. Quote, medicalization, not legalization. This is a quote from the director of the medical cannabis unit within the Ministry of Health. Officially, the medicalization reform started on April 1st, a few months ago. In fact, it was gradually built on decisions taken in the past decade and in 2010, 11, and 14. Which means that the cannabis reform progressed despite earlier criticisms. An appeal to the Supreme Court of Justice was made by the Medical Cannabis Association of Patients, on 31st March this year, and I contributed a 93 pages expert opinion titled The Medical Cannabis Reform, Bioethical Implications, in brackets, scientific, medical, and ethical, of the policy of the government of Israel and the Ministry of Health, medicalization, not legalization. Prior to that, except for this expert opinion, I submitted 2 other expert opinions on this topic in administrative appeals of patients that the quantities of cannabis were substantially reduced, like 80% reduction. Last semester, I gave with my colleague, Zachi Klein, a first academic course in Israeli universities on cannabis. It was a course which hosted visitors. It was titled Cannabis, a critical outlook on society, medicine, and science. You will see my meaning soon. The course was based on bottom-up social and medical health experience and research, biohacking, by patients, lawyers who were practicing, defending patients' rights in courts, etc. Structure of the paper. Part 1, the medicalization science reform and crisis. Part 2, shorter, medical ethics, dilemmas and beyond. Then I will reach my conclusions and final words and updates. So part 1 regards the medicalization science reform and crisis. I say crisis because we are talking about dozens of cases of hardships, thousands of people facing ill health and disease because of mistreatment or prevention of treatment. You're talking about people dying, although they might have survived if medical cannabis treatment was provided. First, the terms, medicalization. They term the reform medicalization, which if you come from the social sciences, you know it would be the same as terming a kindergarten system reform pedophilization. Pedophilization. I mean, it's like it's using the wrong word. I will not go into medicalization, but you see there is a lot of discourse about it. Selling sickness, the medicalization trap. Medicalization of women's behavior. Medicalization and defiance. I mean, social issues. Medicalization is a social process by which the medical profession gets authority and often excessive power over social issues with relevance to health. Now, I consider myself a health expert because I'm a teacher of yoga, and I'm a teacher also of martial arts, Kung Fu, Tai Chi, Qigong. I haven't been sick for around 10 years. I enjoy playing with my chi. That's easy Kung Fu once you know how to be in good posture. So I'm an expert on posture. And presently, students of medicine who study anatomy do not study the basic fact that a hand should be round and that the thumb should be always down. Because when you do this, there is action, and this action actually locks your neck. This is what makes Tai Chi and Chi possible. I call this biohacking, the ability to learn how to become healthier, including using science and biology. It began from do-it-yourself biology, taking biomarkers, for example, how many breaths you make, take your blood pressure or heart. So this is a bottom-up academic or non-academic research aimed at personal health and growth of knowledge and understanding. Since it is not part of medicine yet, I consider medicine as a narrower field than health in general. And medicalization or excessive authority over health issues given to doctors is ignoring the fact that there are other factors in health rather than present-day medicine with its sort of limited conceptions, because they think that chakras, meridians, and chi do not exist. And now you can testify for the difference. So medicalization of health is broader than FDA-approved medicine. Within the framework of medical cannabis, we're talking about also medicalization of key components in ancient yoga, in the worship of Shiva, who is considered in India to be the god of yoga. And until present day, he is being worshipped by smoking bhang, which is a form of cannabis. So why should doctors receive exclusive authority over cannabis and not, say, yoga teachers? Now, medicalization, again, from the social sciences perspective, has a side effect, iatrogenesis, which is a process by which physicians cause harm by means of the medical treatment itself, and by this I do not mean only the side effects or mistakes or mistreatment according to standard practice. We also mean the preventing certain kinds of cures, over-medication, which is standard practice, but it still causes death, therefore it's a cause of iatrogenesis, of causing harm by patients. Now the reformers termed the reform medicalization, and they were not aware of this risk of side effect of iatrogenesis. There is no discussion of the possible problems of medicalization. Now we're talking medicalization, not legalization. This caused the medical establishment in Israel to confuse between medicine and policy. Because the 106th procedure, the Green Book, became an instrument to prevent leakage of medical cannabis to non-medical users. So healing were replaced with policing. So presently we face costly procedures which take months or even years to get medical cannabis license. Many are being refused and thrown into the black market. License require physicians' recommendations. They are mostly private. There are only a handful of physicians. It could take a year just to get an appointment. It is supervised and then facing veto by the administrative committee within the medical cannabis unit, which overrule medical decisions without even seeing the patients. Medical cannabis license could be revoked, has to be renewed every 3 months, subjected to many restrictions, etc. Medical license require consumption of medical cannabis only at homes, like a curfew, not in front of the children. This is a criminal offense. Driving license could be revoked. So, within the framework of medicalization, not legalization, we face inability on behalf of the medical establishment to understand threats of power and authority of physicians and the medical establishment on society. especially when the two conflicting roles of healing and policing are combined in the medicalization of the legalization reform. Now, the medical establishment says legalization is a social decision, not medical. We don't want to be suppliers of drugs, etc. As if there could be a technical amoral standing on any medical issue, notwithstanding the issue of medical cannabis. Since amoral, pseudo-technical decisions degrade to systematic immoral conduct, as we shall see. Now, the conventional conservative view regarding legalization in general is, we argue there is insufficient evidence to support the safety of cannabis and its subsequent legalization for recreational use. And that's how science or lack of evidence or misreading evidence serve as an argument within the political system. But doctors say something similar regarding not legalization but the medicinal use, which makes them conservative without medical or scientific justification. Now, what are the social or medical alternatives to this conservative view? We give people opiates who lowered the life expectancy in the US for a few years already. We give chemotherapy, perhaps when it's not needed, antidepressant, pharmaceutical. We make people go to the black market. We criminalize segments of society. Shouldn't medical doctors say something about it, at least regarding the medical uses? I call this dilemma professional conflict of interest. You cannot trust doctors because they have learned only pharmaceutical medicine. They never learned plant medicine. They never learned yoga as part of their studying. So they don't know cannabis. It's always something new for them. And perhaps they are used to work with pharma industry, and they are used to prescribe medical drugs, not plants. And maybe they have some economic or professional reasons to continue their relationship with these industries. Now, an interim remark. February 1st, I participated in another roundtable that they organized in Bangkok, and I gave a talk about disciplinary science and the rule of experts. It was titled "The Rule of Experts: Bioethical Implications of Disciplinary Science," and I gave the example of water fluoridation. And I argued in this talk that current science is composed of autonomous regions and in science and medicine, that is, disciplines, subdisciplines, areas of special expertise, etc., some of which are based on conceptual fallacies and erroneous theories, which the so-called scientific community is unable to correct due to the structure of present-day science, of disciplinary, expert-based science, which is no cross-disciplinary criticism or truth-seeking. If you have an expertise in medicine, unless you reach out, nobody will discuss with you your topic from other expertise in medicine or someone for the social sciences or from engineering. Unless you choose to cooperate, there is no cross-disciplinary criticism. If there were, you could have criticized economists. But nobody can criticize economists. This is a group thinking within the discipline. And the medical cannabis reform exemplify this argument. But before I proceed, I want to remind of another argument that I made at that presentation. That morality in disciplinary science is called professional ethics. For example, medical ethics, which is often presented as wider than morality in general, since it includes also the professional part. So I mean, if we're an ethics committee in a certain subject, we should have not only philosophers or ethicists, we should have the experts who explain this or that medical treatment, for example. So the expert side get the authority to establish truth and therefore the good, which pretty much mandate the conclusions of many of the discussions in ethics committees. There is a cure, bioethics, in the sense of Van Rensselaer-Potter, 1970, which is holistic, multidisciplinary, humanistic, ethics, science, and medicine, including specialized disciplinary point of view, not excluding them. We have holistic and expert disciplinary point of views together, within a deep ecological outlook, aiming for enhancing values such as survival of humans and the planet, nature as a whole. The second cure is discursive ethics. And here I follow Marcelo Dascal, who died recently. The cure is criticism of the discourse of science. Now, Marcelo Dascal was a theorist of controversies. He argued that if we follow controversies, we could really see the advancements of science, because advancement of science is created when people argue, not when everybody agreed on a certain principle or concept. Now he distinguished between discussion, which aims at truth, but within agreement on basic principles and concepts. So group thinking. Dispute, in which we do not seek the truth, but we want to win in the eyes of other parties. Say, in a judicial conflict in court. Controversy is when sides aim for truth, but then see that the argument spreads to methodologies, concept, who are the experts, what's the relevant evidence, etc. So if we allow ourselves to go into controversy, we could have advanced science. What I will show is the present reform in medical cannabis was purely disputational. No dialogue was made with nobody. Next point. When government and scientific or medical establishment would not observe truth. In the US, the drug's medical use was curtailed in 1970 when the Controlled Substance Act listed cannabis as a Schedule I substance with no medical value and with a high potential for abuse. Now this is the law, and the law lies. So every time we live in a society in which lies are being codified into laws, we have a serious problem. It affected cannabis, certainly medical cannabis, which could have had so many more uses than it has today. And we know these things for decades now. So present policy of the state is like this. Drugs can ruin your life. So if I catch you with them, I'm sending you to jail and ruin your life. April 1st, another reform was kicked. The decriminalization reform by the Ministry of Internal Defense, Gilad Erdan. Not really decriminalization. It begins with high fines, like $300 a fine, and then it's doubled to $600 on your second. If you caught one more time, and if you appeal on the sign, it triples, and that's just the beginning. You could face, with this decriminalization, until 3 years in prison for using cannabis. So there is another appeal to the Supreme Court regarding the criminalization policy of the Israeli government. I will not discuss it here. Presenting like this, the ethical issues could be turned, well, freedom and see item 1. It's freedom and freedom against oppression. Just the stupidest law possible. Just legalize and tax it like we do liquor. But there is an environmental ethics aspect. Because the Ministry of Health refuses to allow growing of hemp because it looks like cannabis. So there is no ecological conscience, not only with regard to water fluoridation, which I'm trying to prevent from reoccurring. Hemp could be used for fuel, paper, housing, nutrition, textile, food, oil, and much more. Ecological industries. So I'm not only giving here a utilitarian argument, medical cannabis is beneficial and it could also serve the environment. Because what we do with this policy is illegalizing a plant. Another aspect of present society, war on nature. But not the worst of the medical cannabis reform. It's the distortion of medical cannabis science. Because we started with real revolutionary science. This is Professor Raphael Mishori. This is a documentary about him, filmed by my co-author, Tzachi Klein. In 1964, he elucidated THC, the active psychoactive ingredient in cannabis. And later, his team discovered CBD, the anti-inflammatory, phytocannabinoid. And then they discovered that the THC resembles an endocannabinoid, or our own cannabinoid, anandamide, resembles, so it activates a receptor. We have the CB1, CB2, there's the CBD. And we discovered we have an endocannabinoid system in our body, like we have the nerve system, and the bone system, and the blood system, cardiovascular, our skin. There is another system on which we know almost nothing. but we know it relates to forgetting, to digestion, to our immune system. So this could be something which will revolutionize medicine. So this was a good part in the medical science. But in the reform, they invented an expert-based subdisciplinary pseudoscience. The reformers claim to be non-users of this illegal drug, so they have no personal experience or insight, purported to make cannabis medical and thus to become leading global authorities in the new medicalized science of cannabis. That was their aim. While the reform is collapsing now, they are traveling abroad, lecturing at conventions about the reform, the new therapeutic method, which in fact is desecration or violation or even rape of science, as we will see. They insisted on making their reform method the exclusive single method for medical cannabis in Israel, discontinuing the method and experience gathered for 20 years. So the medical cannabis reform is based on a number of unscientific decisions. That is, they couldn't be excused as errors or mistakes, which are scientific decisions. Now, you know, a good lie rests on foundation of truth. And the best lie is 99% true. The true part in the reform is what I showed before, the cannabinoid research following Professor Mishori, and some research done on the medicinal use of cannabis. But the medicalization pseudoscience began with the relevant, best updated cannabinoids and medical cannabis science and data. The rest is made of 1. Regulatory bureaucratic decisions regarding indications, doses, preliminary requirements for eligibility to medical cannabis treatment, etc. All without any foundation in research, data, or physicians' and patients' experience. Most contradict research, data, or physicians' and patients' experience. So the first was the decision. The second, the aesthetics of pharma drug. How is pharma medicine looks like? No edibles, because you do not eat medicine. So they abandoned cannabis cookies, which was administered, which some patients prefer. It is sold only in pharmacies, in packages that indicate precise dosage of active ingredients, according to similar chain of value as pharmaceutical drugs, not just as before, growers and consumers, patients. Now we have also labs, factories, dispensaries. So prices went up, hundreds and thousands %, depending on quantity. This science regards only 3, actually 2, cannabinoids, THC and CBD, an indication of CBN, but they don't refer to it. Out of about 165 and counting different cannabinoids, and about 350 and counting other different phytochemical compounds in cannabis, terpenes, flavonoids, and ignoring the well-known entourage or assemblage effect. Entourage is that you have a leading component, for example THC, and the others help, and assemblage is that the total assemble of phytochemicals give a different quality or strength to the total combination. So they ignore that. They set instructions for percentages of THC and CBD only on the packages, which no natural strains exhibit. Thus mandating the odd practice of blending different strains of cannabis together, then chopping them, then putting them in plastic packages with the exact dosage of THC and CBD. And most important, such packages could be sold in superfarm chain pharmacies. They thus completely ignore the ups and downs of different strains of cannabis, which commonly and unscientifically referred to as sativa, which is up, and indica, which is sort of relaxing, down. In yoga, we would say sattva and tamas energies. And of course, we're talking about the whole packages is contrary to present insight into personalized medicine, in which different people react differently to same chemical compounds, so they may need something else. Certainly when we regard different strains of cannabis. Now, how do you like your coffee? Users of cannabis don't want to be in the same mood the whole time. They want to change their mood. Sometimes they like this kind, sometimes they use the other. I met a medical cannabis patient, and I said, well, how are you? He said, oh, great, I got this wonderful strain, and it really is doing me good. But now I want to take some and change with another, because I don't want to be in the same mood the whole time. That sort of insight is completely out of sight of present day medical mindset and the medical cannabis reform. Now they insist on restricting indications, they excluding indications which were in widespread use 100 years ago, such as headaches, migraine, menstrual pain, etc. They are restricting new indications for new diseases such as fibromyalgia, Parkinson, cancer, except for treating chemotherapy side effects. And then they take the medicine from patients. Although cannabis works instantly, within seconds, it is regarded purely as a long-term treatment. They refuse to allow extracts, oils, etc. Their medical-grade cannabis depends on fragile strains of female-only virgin plants because they want to have the same replicability. You remember the aesthetics of science? Replicability. Therefore, these are weak plants treated with powerful herbicides which are often inhaled, which are then inhaled by patients, which shouldn't be exposed to chemicals. They are treated with gamma rays, which is not destructive to THC and CBD, right? But it is destructive to significant terpenes and flavonoids, which, by the way, give cannabis its smell. In short, they are trying to rape the plant, cannabis, into a semi-pharmaceutical drug in order to make it more medical. That's why I said the aesthetic of science. And I think that now we see the limits of evidence-based science because they have no method to criticize this reform, which was kick-started years ago. Now we come to the shorter part 2, which is specifically about medical ethics and beyond. In medical ethics, we say there is an obligation to give patients, obligation on the part of doctors, physicians, to give patients the best medical treatment possible. Professional obligation to provide the best care and respect the patients as a person. We call it autonomy, right? This is a quote from, sorry, it's a small character, a quote of a letter of the Director General of the Ministry of Health from 2010. It was sent to the then head of the Medical Cannabis Division. The policy that regarding CEO guidelines. The policy that I hereby determine is to limit the number of users, even at the expense of exclusion of other diagnoses, which, among other things, would harm some people who could get medically better underlined in the original. Specifically, I would like to limit. He was the Director General of the Ministry of Health, now is the Director General of one of the biggest hospitals in Israel, in Tel Aviv. Specifically, I would like to limit 1. Inclusion of diagnoses of common diseases such as Parkinson's, because it would include in one stroke 100,000 people. Inclusion of diseases that are difficult to diagnose accurately, e.g. fibromyalgia syndrome. Diseases for which the response to cannabis is similar to another pharmaceutical drug. And he adds, I would like you, the recipient, to examine the process which took place in California on this issue, which led to excessive broad medical use. Sincerely, and it was CC'd to the Deputy Director General and to the Legal Department. And nobody said anything about not providing the best treatment and perhaps violating patient's autonomy. Now, primum non nocere. First, do no harm, right? So they are insisting on treating patients with conventional pharmaceutical drugs, including opiate painkillers, even when they potentially pose greater risk through side effect than medical cannabis, which is essentially non-toxic. Reduction of doses and quantities, discontinuation of beneficial treatment, administrative decisions which drive off the market strains of cannabis which are irreplaceable for certain patients. These are all decisions which were made in this reform. Informed consent. While the minute, the small risk of medical cannabis are overstated, many physicians, as encouraged by higher authorities, do not openly discuss the benefits of cannabis versus conventional treatments. The reform actively violates patients' rights to continuation of the therapeutic treatment by cancellations and restrictions on licenses, by reduction of quantities. One of the expert opinion that I submitted to court was regarding a patient that they took 80% of the quantity he was using, and he was using extracted oil. There are other questions. Do we have the right to cannabinoids nutrition? Because you remember it is a plant. It could be eaten. So maybe we need it as a nutrition. Think about cannabis as a medical drug. Perhaps it's the wrong category. And perhaps we need it. We need this nutrition because humans have used cannabis in most cultures, or all cultures, for many years. How about medical cannabis as a preventive treatment? Do we have such a right? There is one problem that is missing here from the list of medical ethics failures. To follow standards of care, because the problem is present medical standards. This is an example of double standard. To take this medicine, which is extract of regular cannabis, you don't need the medical cannabis license. Why? Because it is manufactured by a pharmaceutical drug, a drug company. That's because the standard is FDA. Only an FDA certified drug can cure, prevent, or treat a disease. You remember the law which could state lies? This is a broad line which our present health policy is based upon. How about research ethics? There are recurring incidents of refusal on the part of the medical establishment and the Ministry of Health to collect data regarding patients with PTSD who were treated with cannabis and cannabis users, cancer therapies. They are hiding data already collected regarding reduced usage of drugs, medical drugs. They prefer to support research which could lead to cannabinoid-based pharmaceutical drugs or synthetic cannabinoid, etc. They are ignoring the combined experience of patients and their physicians, that is ignoring biohacking in the sense I mentioned before. It is almost impossible to get permission to experiment cannabis and psychedelics with human subject. No authorization from Helsinki committees managed by physicians. Remember the professional conflict of interest. They are refraining from collecting data which could disprove current arguments against cannabis, e.g. psychotic breakdown, outbreaks of schizophrenia, traffic accidents, etc. And they have no research regarding cannabis extracts or cancer. The state of the polemics is that, again, double standard. Experiments with rats which show relief or resistance to cancer, they say, no, but you cannot infer it from rats to humans. But statements of risk which are inferred from rats to humans, that's okay. Before I was asking about truth in general, about the state and its laws. But shouldn't medical doctors also observe truth? Well, frequently it isn't. Not in the case of the medical cannabis reform. And governmental agencies, and not only the Israeli Anti-Drug Authority, keep stating facts which are untrue about cannabis. There is a linkage between science and democracy because present conventional medicine and medical point of view is being used now against encouraging medical cannabis usage. Medicalization reform reinforces cultural intolerance for cannabis-related culture. Oh, you want to just for fun, right? No, this is part of a lifestyle. It's part of a culture. If we're talking about cross-cultural perspective, we have different cultures also within society. You know that hippie culture was persecuted by President Nixon via the anti-drug laws. But the worst, I consider, on the behalf of the medical establishment, is their inability to respond to criticism about the reform. Scientific, medical, agricultural, ethical. I've been published with Tzachi Klein, my co-author, paper since 2015, stating most of this criticism and much more. There were other criticisms, including a big disposition paper by the Medical Cannabis Association, and there was a Knesset parliamentary discussion with an extensive protocol. The reform ignored altogether this criticism. There is also a failure on the behalf of the Israel Medical Association, the IMA, which represent the conservative anti-cannabis standpoint of the Israeli medical establishment. So far, they made no statement regarding medical ethics of cannabis. Traditionally, heads of the Israel Medical Association strongly opposed medical cannabis. And there is also the undiscussed bioethical dilemma, the right to altered states of consciousness, which is also associated with cannabis, and regards also psychedelics, especially psilocybin, magic mushrooms, ayahuasca, MDMA, and LSD, and now others. Now, before I conclude, a remark on addiction, dependence, and abuse of cannabis. Regarding cannabis and psychedelics, no addiction in the sense of physical symptom of withdrawal. There are certainly questions of dependence and misuse and abuse, which are not yet fully understood, since the other endocannabinoid system is not yet understood. So we don't really understand why people misuse. Perhaps it is related to bodily functions we do not understand. And of course, we don't want our youth to use cannabis. Conclusions. Medical cannabis involves questions of values, facts, rights, power, citizenship, science, and state, medicine, health, nutrition, politics, democracy, paternalism, and religious, spiritual, and cultural tolerance. In general, the medical establishments failed in the medical cannabis test in all the above issues. to the degree of intolerance and harassment of deviants, that is heretic, pro-medical cannabis physicians. This multiple failure is the root cause of the grand failure of the medicalization, not legalization, reform. The failure involved professional conflict of interest of the medical pharmaceutical system and their amoral technical ethical standpoint, which degraded to unethical, immoral practices and procedures. Conclusions. B. Unethical science cannot be true. Unethical medicine is dangerous to patients' welfare, health, and society. Final words. There is a medical cannabis underground. That's my own term. Networks of information and assistance and illegal sharing of medical cannabis among patients and activists. Networks of illegal import and distribution of the non-psychoactive CBD. Networks of illegal experts of extraction of medical oils, just activists. E.g. RSO, the Rick Simpson oil, and other non-authorized medical cannabis products for treating cancer, epilepsy, autistic children, and other patients. Really righteous people doing important voluntary work and being persecuted often by the state. There is growing hostility and resentment towards the state and the government, especially the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Interior. There is a sense of persecution and injustice. As I said, medicalization, not legalization, meaning the continuous criminalization of over 1 million cannabis users in Israel. Occasional and mostly occasional. And dozens of thousands of medical cannabis users, licensed and unlicensed. Latest news. The coming hearing at the Supreme Court of Justice will be on 22nd next month, immediately after the national elections, 5 days after. 2 days ago, the Israeli president, Rubi Rivlin, intervened in the crisis. The prime minister said he would intervene. But I'm not sure if we should be happy with this intervention because since 1979, the Supreme Court of Justice accepts uncritically and almost unconditionally the position of the government's experts. And due to left-right political tensions in Israel, the Supreme Court doesn't want to rule against the government. But I think in this case it is important that a decision in principle will be made, which is based on ethical considerations which recognize the total immorality and the breaches of obligation and responsibilities by government officials. Since we are talking about decisions which perhaps breach the constitutional basic law on human dignity and liberty and patients' rights law. So decisions should be made in such a case. Now, the Israeli Pharmacist Association everything took place last week. Joined the Ministry of Health in supporting the medical cannabis reform. They argued, one, that medical cannabis should be sold as a reform mandate in pharmacies, like any other drug, and they said that in pharmacies it is the best way to provide medical cannabis while preventing leakage to non-licensed users. And that's, as before, professional conflict of interest. We have inability to distinguish between a drug and a cure. They think all cures are drugs. No. So perhaps if we're talking about medical plant, should be sold elsewhere. By the way, the director of the medical cannabis unit is a pharmacist. They're happy to serve as instruments of the medicalization and criminalization forces under present conservative, pharmaceutical-oriented medical establishment. Agents, therefore they are agents of prohibition, paternalistic, oppressive, present policies. Previously, about 2 years ago, the Organization of Pharmacists published a position paper regarding medical cannabis, full of scientific and medical inaccuracies on par with those described above regarding the medical cannabis reform. So I will not go into this. So again, we have professional conflict of interest. Because studies show that medical cannabis, where it is allowed, reduces at least by 30% medication usage. So people stop using pharmaceuticals, they use cannabis instead. Latest news. There was a Telegram-based application called Telegrass, was founded by this guy, Amos Dov Silver, which enabled every citizen to order cannabis on the internet, on the black market. There was widespread of this application. He fled to the US, was persuaded to arrive in the Ukraine, was arrested, ran away, caught and brought last week to Israel to face trial. Now what is he? Is he criminal? Is he righteous? Because he was providing for free medical cannabis. And he didn't profit himself. That's what they say anyhow. Is he a freedom fighter then? A social activist? But he's being treated as a criminal. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Daniel. You didn't bring any samples with you?
Unfortunately, I obey the law.
Unfortunately for us, it's on video and they're watching. It's a national university. Who would like to make some comments or questions? Share your experience? Good. Okay. Okay. Okay, Akiko, please.
Okay, thank you so much.
Please.
So, interesting presentation. Yeah, it's very interesting that many things. Sometimes we have the same things happens, like legalization or the medicalization. Anyway, we try to control something using some power, and even a criminal things. But anyway, that is my comment. But Japan has also a very interesting story about cannabis. Cannabis was very important in Japanese culture before the especially World War II, and it, for the medicine, and also we use it for the causes, and also we use it for the ごめんなさい、そうですね、洋服とか薬とか、あと religious things. But as I know, American government after World War II said we should ban the cannabis. And the interesting thing is we have some cannabis movement in Japan too. So when they say did research what is the rationalization behind the ban of the cannabis and scientific rationalization or the other things. And also they sue the government and towards the Ministry of Health. And do you have evidence that cannabis is bad? And it's very interesting things. And I have not done research if it is true or not by myself, but they say is like, I don't know if it's true or not, but those movement, social activists said American government banned cannabis not because controls people's behavior of the not because just the cannabis is dangerous, but also American government wanted to sell the plastic. That is the social activist said, because we can use many things using cannabis instead of plastics.
Yeah.
Yes. So anyway, and finally, officer of the Ministry of Health said, no, we did not have enough evidence to control the ban the cannabis. So anyway, this is just a comment, but we also have an interest in the similar story in Japan about cannabis. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I would love to know more about the Japanese movement, and I especially like the idea that it was related to traditional Japanese culture, because that just exemplify once more the oppressive nature of present prohibition. You are right about plastic. Hemp could have replaced much of the plastic we're presently using. So we have an ecological industry suppressed by present powers, the big polluting corporations. This is as simple as that. It's not only plastic, it's not only pharmaceutical. We could have replaced wood-based paper. So stop chopping trees. Use much rapid, 6 times more rapid grown hemp instead of trees. Fuel, I've only just started. So we're talking about an ecological outlook. And the fact that ecological considerations are not being used today is evident that something is terribly wrong within science. That's what I try to argue about the disciplinary the perils of disciplinary science, the dangers of disciplinary science, because you have no cross-disciplinary considerations. If there were in interdisciplinary and cross-disciplinary discourse, they would have culminated in an ecological outlook, because ecological outlook is the multidisciplinary perspective one could have. So far we have no holistic outlook on anything. That's why present society cannot begin to solve the ecological crisis. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments or questions? Anybody with experience of using cannabis?
Well, I have a cousin
Yeah.
who have a drop of cannabis every month. I mean, for one drop, whole month.
A
One
whole
drop
month?
and it's good for a whole month.
Yeah, for a whole month at night time before he go to bed.
Wow.
Once a day or once a
Once
month?
once a day for a whole month.
Yeah, once a
Okay.
day. Yeah.
So after that, he feel very sleepy. His
Yeah.
secretary told him that, oh, you are changing, you are sleepy, but he's very, very strong. And then he went to see a doctor, and it happened to be the side effect of the cannabis. But I
When-
think that is due to the distraction. I mean, the wrong way.
As I said, there is this unscientific distinction between strains of cannabis. The sativa, which is a sense of up, and the indica, which is a sense of down. So, if you want to be sleepy and relaxed, use the indica. If you want to be fully aware, indulge in sensation, use the sativa. From the yoga perspective, as I said, the sativa is sattva, is like awareness, but with a relaxation of like just before you go to sleep. So just before you go to sleep, you have no energy, but you feel relaxed, right? Right? If you were running for 1 kilometer, you finish, you feel all excited, but not relaxed, right? So sattva is the relaxation plus the plus awakeness. The tamas is closer to the effect of alcohol. Like it's put you to sleep. So depends which strains. This is one of the things which prove that the reform is unscientific, because once they chop all the strains together, there are two strains, for example, which were very common in Israel. The Erez and the Alaska. The Alaska was considered sativa, up, and the Erez was considered indica, which is down, and they had exactly the the same percentage of THC and CBD. So it's a strain, it's not a dosage of the different chemicals. That's why you have to know about
I think
the personal effect, and
Yeah.
that's why I mentioned as a criticism the fact that these physicians who prescribe medical cannabis say, but we haven't used it, we just do it medically.
Yeah.
So they don't know the difference. Sorry, you were saying?
So I think that we need to have a more knowledge upon this before we can use it.
Exactly, and knowledge also based on the experience of the treating physicians and the users themselves. Again, that's biohacking that I said. People who knows how this and that affect them, and the more they have experience, the more they could tell. I know a cannabis patient who is an official, who does officially testing of different strains of cannabis. So growers call her and give her samples, and she can tell them what's the exact effect out of her sensations, which is the highest form of knowledge.
Yes, Raphael?
And then let's agree that the medical, the scientific discourse is false, related to interest, economical interest. How can we distinguish between the counter discourses? Which is true? Because it seems to me that in some cases it is fashionable to say that science is false, but to propose some, I'm sorry, some bullshit. I remember a woman in Italy 20 years ago. She was arrested because in television she was selling some candles and some magical numbers to treat cancer. because you say medical science can't treat cancer, can't cure cancer patients, so buy my candles, buy my magical number. Of course, it was pure speculation. How can we distinguish the true counter discourse? Is it possible?
I thank you very much for your question, because I want to explain this. You have real science and medicine presently. If your body breaks up in a traffic accident, they know how to fix you. So there are lots of good things in medicine, so I don't say that medicine is false. My argument was about the risks involving disciplinary science, in which you create areas of expertise which are immune to criticism. And in these areas you can create tradition of, you have papers and conferences, and you have the expert, and they all say the same thing. For example, regarding water fluoridation, which is totally false science. I cannot explain it now, but there is a paper published in the last Journalist Abuse Journal, so you're invited to read, and that's only the 3,000 word abstract of the work I've been writing on. This part, the medical cannabis reform, as I've showed you, and you didn't have to be scientist to understand, right? That's what I said, that science is bad if it does not understand its philosophy. And philosophers are good at understanding the philosophy behind science. You shouldn't be like flashed by, oh, he's scientist. No, but what are his presumptions? Perhaps some of a scientist's presumptions are false. For example, materialism, which doesn't include the possibility of chi. I think that's, or meridians. Here, I'll show you the power of meridians. You see? I'm holding myself only with the hand. That's meridians. You couldn't do it by using the muscles. You have to release the energy. So a science which is too materialistic, which does not incorporate yet the 100 years old findings of quantum theory. If present medicine is not yet quantum theory informed, it means that they think that it's not related to medicine. So in this respect, you have areas of ignorance. For example, the structure of the palm. I tell my student that my big toe is a proof that this is beyond present day knowledge. Okay? What's the meaning of stretching your toe? That's not part of medicine yet. So you have just witnessed an advancement of science. This is also the meridian of the head. So you have areas of ignorance, and if they are not acknowledged, they grow into errors. That's why, and the cures, as I said before, ethics, bioethics in the sense of Van Rensselaer, and ethics of scientific discourse, in which people from other disciplines are allowed to make criticism and are heard and responded to. Real controversies. I like your example about this woman who sells this. Let's talk about medical cannabis extracts. They work. But there is no certified academic professional knowledge about it. So it's only being practiced by volunteers. Some are better than others. So they all sell they all, not sell, provide. It's all volunteers. They all provide treatment with a substance which is basically good, but some of them did mistakes regarding percentages of this and that. THC, CBD. So the problem is not how you discard of claims of really quacky medicine, as they say in the US, but how can you make science and medicine better? Even using the same things they already know by now, to a certain extent. I often see papers about the benefits of yoga or Tai Chi, and they say things like, well, in average, yoga practitioners or Tai Chi practitioners have, let's say, a 30% reduction in back problems, for example. What does it mean? I mean, where did they practice yoga? How good was the teacher? How good was the practitioner? I undergone a serious accident more than about 24 years ago in my back. You see, I have no problem with my back. So yoga was acting not in reducing percentage of back pain. It solved the problem. Could we have an open scientific discourse about it? Present day we couldn't. Not in disciplinary science. You have to be part of the Faculty of Medicine. To be certified in a certain subject. To publish in professional journals which has editors who wouldn't accept contra reviews. I cannot now rewrite autonomy as I see it in an anatomy journal. I cannot. They will not accept my paper. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Daniel. It's really interesting talk.